So my name is Bob Ballard. I'm a government IT strategy advisor for Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft about 11 years now, and I've been an IT guy for, I think I started getting paid when I was about 17, so that's 24 years, I guess, at this point now. So my entire life, I've been in IT in one fashion or another. So I just thought I'd kick off with just a couple of framing things, and then we'll get into the meat. One is, when the InfraGard folks asked me to come out here and talk about cloud and particularly archiving, although at Microsoft, right, we do just about everything that we offer in the cloud, and if not today, soon, right, and we can talk about that a little bit more. Just like to start off with, okay, why do people go this way? And one was already brought up, right, new economics. It's a little cheaper, right? That's the way, at least, that's the way we go into this thinking, right? And in many cases, it proves to be true. And we can talk a little further about that. But some things like more predictable costs in the government space, right? This is a big deal, right? So what happens if I deploy software today, right? And I sort of have this heartbeat of operational cost about every 3 to 5 years, right? I need to go to the new platform, and boom, there's $500,000 for the new platform, and then I cruise along at some known cost for a while, and then 3 to 5 years. Well, what if we could predict that a little bit better and say, it's going to cost you, $200,000 a year, period, right? And by the way, you'll be on the latest and greatest of whatever platform you're talking about, all on your own, right, without having to worry about it, right? And so that's a big part of it. The reduced management side, let's be honest, right? We don't have bigger IT staffs now, right? If anything, we're stable and asked to do a lot more, and in many cases, getting smaller or being reallocated to other projects that aren't in this core space, right? So, so we need to do better with management, right? And then that plays into some of the heartbeat conversations on the cost side, right? So let's just say the cost isn't an issue. Okay, no one in this room is going to say that, but let's just pretend that it isn't, right? I have plenty of customers that just don't have the expertise to be on the latest platform within, there are features and benefits of that platform they want to use. They sometimes own the software, right? They just can't get that from you, right? So how do I make sure that happens, right? And then as a result of being on this latest and greatest stuff, right, better productivity for everyone. Now on the archiving side, there's a little bit, we'll talk about that, but when we look at this in a broader sense, right, having these capabilities available to add this feature or that feature by, making a call and a purchase and boom, it's on, versus planning, deployment, 12 months, etc. So those are the reasons why people like the cloud, right? So that's a big part of it. So okay, great. What's different about Microsoft in the cloud? Just a couple of things, and then we're into the meat of this, right? Microsoft's strategy is built on a good software story to begin with, right? So we didn't go out and take a bunch of consumer products and turn them into cloud products, right? We took our enterprise products and made them available on the cloud, right? So Exchange is somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% market share in the enterprise, right? So that's the basis of our messaging solution, and even our archiving solution as we get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So we've got a great story, and then on the other side of it, we're in the enterprise business. A lot of cloud vendors, Proofpoint is not one of these, but a lot of cloud vendors come from the consumer world, right? That's, hey, let's start charging for some of these free services and let's offer them up. But their expertise is not in sort of enterprise support and integrating with enterprise applications. And that can create challenges and expectation levels, right? Somebody should pick up the phone whenever you call if it's enterprise support, right? And that's not always the case. That's one thing, to keep your eyes out when you're looking at cloud vendors, right? It isn't always that way. And then in the middle, I think we'll talk about why we have a solution that's an archiving solution, for instance, in the Microsoft space. It's choice and flexibility. Let's say we get through this conversation and you say, what, I liked everything I saw here for your presentation, Bob, but maybe the cloud isn't for me. Well, guess what? It's available on premise too, right? So at Microsoft, we have those options. And what we see is those options can be some people on premise, some people on the cloud, even within the same application. That's what New York City is looking to do in central IT, right? They just signed a deal with us. They're going to be moving about 30,000 users to the cloud, probably much more than that over time. But there's going to be a period of time where there's a mixture, right? And so within the same application, or even in the case of the archiving, taking some core components like the regular mailbox that you have and leaving it on premise, and just doing the archiving functions of Exchange in the cloud, right? And so we have that option available as well, right? And so we have a lot of flexibility here. And when we're looking at complicated public sector environments, that's important, right? And that's definitely something that you don't see from many cloud vendors. I'm obligated by law to go through, okay, here's, just to give you the story, right? And so we have some sort of online solution, cloud-based solution, sold in 48 of the 50 states from a public sector perspective, right? That doesn't necessarily mean statewide, right? But just deals sold into public sector entities in 48 of the 50 states. 4.2 million licenses sold in state and local government for cloud-based services. New York State uses hosted filtering, which is the previous generation of the product I'm going to talk about today. Right, there's about 60,000 people for filtering, or closer to 100,000, I think, now for filtering, and moving towards 60,000 people for archiving. So we're gonna, it's the previous platform. A number of customers there. Some biggies, some places you might have heard of over there. Those are statewide deals. The state of California. Roughly about 100,000 of their 300,000 employees are on their way to the cloud now. State of Nebraska, City of New York, State of Minnesota. And then we just added, very recently, the City of San Francisco. And we could go on. We actually had a tremendous last quarter with bringing on cloud folks in public sector. Not to mention, by the way, a whole litany. I'm a state and local government guy, and they always get annoyed if I put federal references up, so I leave them off. Here's another, and the reason why I like to put this slide up is, I've got things from City of Folly Beach, right, which I think is like 12 people and a rental car, right, and on up to much larger things like Cook County Hospital, which is where ER is based on, right? So Mammoth, 10,000 person state-run hospital, right? So the gamut, right? And it fits needs in public sector from the very small to the very large. State of California, 100,000 seats kind of scenario, all the way down to Folly Beach. I almost never, you think, showing federal references makes people annoyed in state and local government, right? Showing commercial references make people even more annoyed, except for this list is pretty impressive, so I throw it out there, right? So not just in the government space, right? These are people that are buying online collaborative services, Exchange hosted online, archiving hosted online, etc. That's the commercial sector that's come on board. And actually, I could add a whole bunch of new, really cool ones that came on in the last 6 months that I haven't updated that slide with. But it's a who's who on both the government side, etc. So there's definitely some momentum there. So you're like, okay, that's cool. We can see a lot of momentum. Is this something I should trust? Give me some things that make me feel comfortable about this, and I'll go through a little bit of that. And then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of what our offering is on the archiving side. And if anybody's interested as a follow-up, I can talk about any of the other platform things that we do. Right? So, the big concerns are, the actual physical and logical security of this, right? I'm going to put my important data out there, right? Privacy and regulatory stuff, right? What happens when I get a FOIA request? Are you going to be able to do this? Is this that I open a service ticket and, I wait 6 months and somebody gives me something? And then, on the data loss and control side as well. So this is, whose data is it? So I can answer that one really quickly and easily. Microsoft and all our product use rights statements, et cetera, it's your data, it's not ours. And from a legal standpoint, right, how we manage that, so if someone were to show up and serve a subpoena to us, we would send them to you, right? We would, and if they're not willing, first of all, they'd have to even know where to go, right? There's 5 data centers in the U.S. They'd have to know which one your data was in, which isn't necessarily likely. But if they did, they'd have to show up the right data center. And then they'd have to try to get their way in. And that's probably not going to happen either. But, as we work, we would certainly, treat this as this is your property and we're the shepherds of it, right? One quick story on this. And when we were first I've been on the online services business for 3 years at Microsoft, which makes me ancient in this business at Microsoft. And early on, we had a lot of these conversations about attorney, ownership of data, all of those things. Even as we once had an attorney go to court for a Hotmail customer. All right, now that's our free consumer-based, email service, because they felt like the way that the search order went down was not appropriate and really out of bounds. And I think they felt like, they figured that there would be no pushback from Microsoft if we just hand it over because it's a free service and we didn't want to tie up an attorney with it, et cetera. And the attorney said, he felt like this thing was so far out of bounds and inappropriate that they said they went to court and fought for a free customer to maintain, that we weren't going to turn over the data, right? And so, obviously, if there's a Homeland Security, Patriot Act seizure, et cetera, right, we have to comply. That's so does everyone else in this room for any of that kind of stuff. So, security program side, this is sort of our standard security management slide here at Microsoft, right? We talk from facility all the way up from data. Just a couple of key points, and you guys probably have a lot of understanding of all of this stuff, but just want to make sure that we let you know that we're in this game too from this perspective, right? When you show up at the facility, there's no signs. If you don't know it's there, you're going to drive right by it. Except for you might notice that it looks like there's a power company sitting behind it because we have our own power management services, etc. Right? So if you happen to think something's up, you show up, right? You can't get on. There's barbed wire. There's gates. There's security. There's physical access. We require badge, biometric login to get into certain rooms. All of those kinds of things. Nothing's labeled on the data center either, right? So it's just a bunch of what look like shipping containers with thousands of servers in each of those shipping containers with nothing labeled on them other than a machine name, right? Which doesn't translate to anything. So that you can say, go change a hard drive or a processor or some memory in machine 3465, right? That's about it. So, obviously all the edge router, intrusion detection, et cetera. I'm sure, preaching to the choir here, people know that Microsoft's clearly a hacking target. We have a lot of experience in dealing with this, right? Whether it's, MSN, Xbox, tell me, you want to talk about a group of people that have an affinity to try to hack their way into something free, right? Think about the users of Xbox Live. So, all of these, the same groups that manage those services manage these services, right? So, they're pretty proficient at this. So, as we go all the way up, from the application side, the user side, the data side, just one thing I want to take a couple things and talk about data access, for instance, how we manage that. So, who here is, runs an Exchange environment or is familiar or interacts with Exchange environments? A couple people, right? So, there might be reasons or times, right, when you need to actually access data to fix something in Exchange, right? You're going to go to the database, you're going to do something, right? Well, so obviously we have to have people that do that if we're going to host it for you. However, our administrators don't have access to anything with their regular login at all, and it's not like they have this second. This is a long preach thing, right? It's not like they have this second login that they can log in anytime they want to. They actually have to request access to Elevate privileges just in time, right? So, hey, I need to access the database. I need to run a repair on it. We're getting some errors. We failed them over to another data center. I need to, I need to access this data. Supervisor says, I see the logs. You're absolutely right. Approves it. They do the job that they need to do. As soon as they're done with the job, the privileges are revoked, and they're standing around where they don't have access to anything anymore. Again, because they're looking at a bunch of screens. So, pretty thorough protocol. We have a great white paper that kind of details all of this stuff that I'm happy to share with the group or post out on the site somewhere if that's something that you guys are interested in. So, we hit a little bit about this, but a couple of things. Number one is all your data is stored in multiple data center locations, no matter what solution you're looking at from Microsoft from a cloud-based perspective. Those databases for public sector customers would be US-based data centers, right? At least 1,000 miles apart. So we have, in the cloud space, we have 4 primary data centers that we leverage for that. One on each of the coasts, one sort of north and south. Your primary data center is generally the one that's closest to you. Secondary would be the one that's most available at one of the other 3, right? So there's 3 copies of that data, by the way. There's a second copy local, and then the tertiary copy is in the secondary data center. So we have local failover available to you as well as a third copy in a in a 1,000 miles away data center if there was the smoking hole concept, right? If somebody dropped a bomb on the data center. So certifications, some things that come up, we have them, right? So we not only have ISO 27001, but we actually added about 80 items to the checklist above and beyond with 27001, and that we're actually working with ISO to incorporate that as a second standard above where we are now. SAS 70 Type 1 and Type 2 certification. We're looking at on the federal side, right? So out of FSMA accreditation. This is a product that just started shipping in June. So we need our first federal customer to take this product to get it FSMA accredited. And so that's ongoing now. But you can't get anything. FSMA accreditation takes a federal customer to take your product and say, I want to get it certified in my environment just for them. But that's on the way as well.
Can I add a comment to that?
Sure.
Sorry, that actually, we do have a customer for the FSMA certified offering, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yes, so, right, and that's not this particular offering that I'm talking about, but that's the dedicated offering.
Exactly.
And that's in conjunction with you, right?
Exactly.
Right, so that's with Proofpoint running the archiving set on that for our dedicated offering. And so we do have offerings that are FSMA accredited, just not this one. It just started shipping 10 days ago, I guess, at this point. So, 99.9% financially backed SLA, right? We don't just tack on extra service at the end. We actually credit you for your next bill, which is not something that all cloud vendors do either. And the best example of why that's important when you're like, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is if I had a 3-year contract with someone and they missed their SLA 25 out of the 36 months, do I want 25 more months of that service for free as the penalty for that? Or do I want to pay less for that? Right, and maybe go find another vendor. Right? And so that's the difference. The other thing is, and I love the breaks, people say, well, Microsoft's kind of new to the cloud. And it's just not true, right? So, clearly on the consumer services side, we've been in the cloud for a long time. We actually run the largest cloud service in the world today, and that's Windows Update Services, right? So every PC that's out there anywhere in the world that, we do patch management in the cloud for every PC out there in the world, and it have been for years, right? That's something you think about. Why? Because it just works. And the reality is, if it didn't work and there were massive problems with that, it would actually make news because there's 200 million PCs affected by that, right? So, global data centers, a lot of interesting things around our data center design, winning awards for power management. It's another side that is not really the charter member, the charter issue in this group, but in the data center business, right, power is money. That's where all the money is. That's the primary cost of anything that we do. We have 14 people that work for us servicing 100 million people, right? So it's not operational people, right? In a major data center, it's about 14 full-time employees on site there, right? So it's not that costs money. It's the power that costs money, right? And so we're certainly driven financially to go down. The side benefit of that is that, the data center that we're breaking ground on in Southern Virginia right now will be the most energy efficient data center in the world by about 25%. So obviously you get to come along on that ride if you go down that path. So now we're into sort of the archiving part. I'm not going to read every single slide word for word, but I do want a couple of major points, right? So why do we archive? Particularly if we're looking at this sort of hybrid model that we're going to talk about mostly today, which is my mail is on premise and I want to archive it, maybe do my archives in the cloud. So, storage management is a big one. So New York State, I know that was one of the reasons why folks wanted to talk to us particularly. What they said was, it's going to cost us too much money to store all this email in our data centers with our standards, et cetera. And when they actually just averaged up what it would cost to store the data in their data center, it was actually cheaper to just give it to us, right? So, and that was just storage costs, not operational costs, not any of those, right? And so, the other part of that is, if I have no archiving system in place, if you're an Exchange customer, where's the data go? It goes into a PST file, and it's either on a hard drive or on a network, or Lord knows where it is, and you'll never find it, right? So, and by the way, there's not a real great story to manage the data that's in that PST file, right? Because I'm doing my local archiving to say, hey, that data's 14 years old. We probably don't want to keep that data anymore, right? We have a good story about that at Microsoft with the Netscape loss, right? That came from a PST file from an email conversation that should have been eliminated, right? And should not have been discoverable because it was longer than our common retention policy, right? It was on somebody's CD or DVD that they had backed up and stuck on a shelf in their office, right? And so, managing these PSTs are a big problem, right? And then on the other side is data retention, and that kind of gets into what I was talking about, right? So not only, I need to keep it for a certain length, but I don't want to keep it we don't have our attorney in the room anymore, but I don't want to keep it a second longer, right? Which is what I was sort of just referring to, right? And then the reason why CIOs have trouble sleeping at night is the discovery part. So what happens when somebody says, I need all your data for this period of time? Are you even capable of doing it? So show of hands in the room. How many people think if somebody said, I need all your messages from everyone in your organization for the last 7 years, that they could deliver it in a week? Nope, one person. You have an archiving solution in place today, right? So without one, it's impossible, right? And that sort of goes to this slide, which is, okay, I got data everywhere, right? People say, well, I got backups. Okay, good. That's an adventure. So I had a customer, state of Maine, that had a bridge collapse, right? It's public knowledge. I can share this bit part of the story, right? They had a bridge collapse, so there's clearly a bunch of lawsuits going on. They needed 10 years of email conversations from everybody in the Department of Transportation and all these affiliated agencies as well. They hired 3 consultants to try to help do it. They could never do it. They could never do it, right? They got put up labs and they were storing stuff from tape and dumping it off, and they never got the traction that they needed. And so that's an issue, right? Because clearly that's in the newspaper, right? If you get a discovery motion and the state says, I can't comply with my discovery motion, somebody's upset, and it's probably in the newspaper. And when you're in public sector, right, job number one is keep your boss out of the newspaper, right? That's what a lot of us have said. So if there's all these reasons why you should do it, right, why don't we all do it? Why was there only one person that raised their hand, right? Part of it is a lot of times there's not great user experience, right, from this. So what am I doing with the data? What happens with it? Depending on what that is, if I'm using it to prune mailboxes, etc., that experience can be poor, right? And so there's a lot of pushback. They're like, I'll just leave it in there and we'll hope no one deletes it, or maybe I'll make up some kludgy rules that keep people from deleting it. But there's not a great story in the past on that. One of the things we see frequently is a complex administration experience, right? Some of these, I just did an online services business analysis for a customer that wants to go from on-premise to in the cloud, right? And the cost for their archiving infrastructure was more than the cost of their mail infrastructure, right? Because they've got more data in the archive than they do in the messaging. There's all these great improvements about why Exchange is pretty easy to administer, and it's got all these features and functions and capabilities and flexibilities, but not all of the other solutions do, right? And then the cost can be high, right? Particularly for some of these on-premise solutions. And what we see in a lot of cases are they have you have to buy them in modules, right? And sometimes the modules don't map up to your needs, so you have to buy a lot of modules that have a lot of features you don't need to get the one feature that you do, right? And that's pretty common. So one of the things we do pretty well at Microsoft is listen to what are the things that surround our solutions, and is there something that makes sense for us to move forward with, right? Because, like I said, I have a customer that says, my archiving environment costs me more than my Exchange environment does, right? But when you ask him what it costs to run Exchange, it's those two put together, right? And I've got no control as a company to help him out to lower his costs on the archive side unless I do something about that, right? So Exchange 2010 came along, we had some capabilities in the product. The cool thing about our online solutions now is you can have Exchange 2010 deployed on premise, and the archive deployed in the cloud, right? And so when we look at that, we break these things in to two main categories, right? So the first part we have to do is we have to preserve the mail, right? That's the first thing we do when we look at archiving solutions. And the second part is that we need to be able to find it once it's preserved. And so, we do the preservation with a couple of things. So, and I'm going to show it, so I'm not going to drill into it too much. I think it's easier to look at it visually than it is for me to read the features off this list. But essentially, we allow you to create policies that say, hey, I want to put this mail in the archive mailbox, and then I want to keep it for X period of time. And I either am or aren't going to allow you to delete it. That's sort of a prevalent. In public sector, it's almost never allowed to be deleted, but I had the state of Nebraska, for instance, was adamant that people be able to sort of triage their messages, that personal messages were not to be archived and not to be discoverable, etc. To me, as someone who talks at national conferences around archiving, that makes me shudder when I think about that somebody could personally remove any message they wanted to before it got archived, but that's their policy decision, not mine, right? And then on top of that, right, we need to have some capabilities for whole policy. Okay, so that bridge collapses and we do a discovery, regardless of whatever my retention policies are, 90 days, 5 years, 10 years, I can't have anything expire while it's under discovery, so we need to hold it, right? And that's all great, right? But then the next part is, then I need to be able to go in and look across everyone's mailbox from a single interface and deliver that, right? So this is Outlook Web Access from Exchange 2010. So we talked a little bit at the front end of this about the end user experience, right, which is sometimes a barrier to these solutions. So if you look, we have, this looks pretty normal, right? Hey, I have my regular mailbox, I have all these other folders. Below it, I have this thing called an online archive, right? That's a second mailbox on our cloud storage. Or, by the way, if you deployed this solution on premise, cheaper storage, right? Because a lot of times archive mail, right, doesn't have to have, the same, I don't need it on SAN per se, right? Because I'm not in and out, I don't need the performance in accessing it, I don't need some of those things, right? So a lot of times we have on-premise customers just deploy this on secondary, cheaper solutions for storage, right, for the archive. It's directly associated. Now, I can get mail in there in a lot of ways. In the Nebraska model, what they want to do is have people right-click on it and classify mail, or drag and drop it into this folder, right? I'm of the mindset that end users won't do anything. If you give them the option to not do anything, at least the bulk of them won't. So, that can be problematic, right? So the other thing we have is to programmatically push mail over a period of time into the archive mailbox. 90 days, 120 days, a year, whatever it is, right? Just to show of hands, average mailbox size here on premise, 200 megs or smaller. Anybody? A couple people. All right. Much larger than that, right? In some cases, right? So right now what you're doing is you're just keeping all your mail in there. So what we have in a lot of cases is for operational reasons, right? Smaller mailbox size, but no archiving policy, which becomes really problematic, right? So people are pushing them to PSTs, they're taking them home, and then you have this discovery motion, you can't find them. So whatever your comfort level is with, especially those that are managing to a smaller mailbox now, set a retention policy that makes it work out that you'll be probably under that 200 meg, like 90 days or 120 days to retain it on premise in their active mailbox. Which, by the way, the studies show that if it's more than 6 months old, there's like 3% chance you'll ever look at any particular message, right? Now, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be discovered or that you shouldn't go and look at it, right? But if it's over 6 months old, you're not looking at those messages. You're looking at a couple, but there's 10,000 back there, right? And so usually the number, anything above 6 months retention on premise in this sort of scenario will not have lots of end user access looking for it in the cloud, right? So a couple of things. We really want to make this, so we saw the web access version, right? Here's Outlook 2010, but it's 2007 as well, that we can have this, hey, look, here's my mailbox, right? Here's my online mailbox. I should have pointed out there. You know, and by the way, I can interact with it just like it's normal mail, right? I can reply to it. I can do all those things. If I set policy that doesn't allow me to delete it, then I can't do those things, right? I can't alter the message. I can't delete it. I can't do any of those. To me, this is the most important feature for end user adoption, period. How many people have at least Outlook 2007? I'm going to stop. The bulk, right? So if you use the search functionality, I stopped putting things in folders once search came out. It was my dream, because I'm lazy by nature when it comes to that kind of stuff, and as soon as I had a good reason not to put it in a folder, I was done with that, right? I still got all my old folders. I've been at Microsoft 11 years, so I got them from back when we didn't have search, but there's nothing in them anymore, right? And so, so I need to be able to go and type into this top bin whatever I'm looking for and have it search both my on-premise and my archive inbox simultaneously, right? So when I get the results back, it's just you don't know where it is and you don't care, right? And that's important, right? That means end users will use the thing, right? And they won't go, where's my mail? The ones that you guys over here that have like just big mailboxes with all your mail in it, it'll still feel the same to them, even though you're not paying to store it on premise, right? So, by the way, this whole thing's available if you outsource all your, if you host your mail in the cloud with us as your primary mailbox and have these kinds of functionality, or, and as we've been speaking, right, you keep your Exchange infrastructure on premise. We do both, right? And that's a cool part of the flexibility. I will say the requirement for this solution is Exchange 2010, right? Outlook 2007 or 2010, but Exchange 2010. That's the requirement today, right? We have great partners for any other solutions that are out there or have different features and functions that may better meet your needs. But from Microsoft's perspective, that's, because of the deep integration experience that we have with this just shows up as another Exchange server in your org, even though it's in the cloud, right? So you get to create policies. You can do whatever you want with this, right? And you can open up a service request on the web and say, you do it for me. But you can also just do it yourself and get faster service if you know what you're doing, right? So when we look at, so we have archiving policies and retention policies. These are the two pieces that make up the story here, right? And so the archiving policy are things like, hey, I want to automatically remove stuff older than 6 months or in 2 years in this case, right? I want to, it also says, hey, I want everything to go in the same folder that they came from, right? So if you are, so we always talk about there's filers and pilers in the world, right, when it comes to everything, but email in particular. So if you are a filer and you have 1,000 folders and you want to be able to go through that, your archive mailbox will have all those, right, just like they are. And then, so then a retention policy is, hey, I want to automatically delete content at a certain date. I want to say the biggest thing is, the biggest request in public sector is sort of this rolling indelible window to say, hey, I want to keep all mail for 5 years. You can't delete it, but in 5 years and a day, I want it gone, right? And I want, unless it's on legal hold, right? And so the combination of those policies, we can accommodate. And when you put them together, you get these capabilities that allow you to do, hey, I have policies on-premise. Now, the only thing is, if you're going to have an indelible situation, right, you'll need to make sure your on-premise 6 months is not deletable as well. And we can walk you through how that works and what you do to make sure that people aren't deleting it before it gets sent up to our archive. And we have some guidance on that. So the cool thing is, I can make these policies different across the organization as well, right? So what I frequently see is that people say, hey, I've got like these executives and we want to keep all their mail for 10 years, but guys that are, janitors, we don't need to keep their mail for 2 years or 10 years or whatever, right? And you can set that policy unique to each individual user, create groups of users to do that with. Legal hold, I'm not sure why we need a whole slide to demonstrate this concept, but we have it in here. And that's just, the capability to say, hey, look, I need to put somebody on litigation hold. You can do it through the GUI. You can do it through the command line as well to do large amounts of folks. Is what you might want to do to use it through the PowerShell commands. and just say, hey, I need to put a whole group of people on legal hold. And then whatever the retention policy then is, don't delete anything forever until legal hold comes off. Right? And then as soon as legal hold comes off, whatever policy was underneath of it will be enacted immediately. So let's say you had a 3-year retention policy, but you were in court for 7 years. Almost all of that email will go away pretty instantaneously once you remove the legal hold policy from it, unless you change your policy. So here's sort of the search interface, right? The ability to, it's a web page. Go in and say, hey, I want to search these mailbox, these users, these specific users, all people in this group, looking for these keywords or all messages or this date range, all the typical things you would expect to do a legal, usually, legal requests, litigation requests, or FOIA requests are very specific in what they want, right? So you can tailor it to that. The cool thing is then you say, okay, and I want to put that in a mailbox, right? This is much more the case for litigation versus FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. I want to put it in a mailbox and I want to share it with the attorney and this person in HR and this management person and invite them to look at it, and they can look at it and say, that's not going, that is going. They can do all those kinds of things they want. Frequently what we have from an attorney standpoint is they pull it into their own tool to sort of do redaction and all that kind of stuff, and they have what they want to use, and it's not our stuff for that. Any questions so far, by the way? I see head nodding, but not any questions. So,
I actually had a question on legal hold.
Sure.
All right. So you've got some litigation. You're in the chief counsel's office. All right, and immediately you call in the CTO or CIO or something like that, and you say, "Hey, look, we've got a situation. I need Division X, Group X on legal hold."
Right.
All right. So you go in, you do that. Click, 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 click. All right. The group is on legal hold. So you set up your retention policy, and it stays there for as long as you have the hold on it. Now, what happens if later on, all right, like you said, case is resolved, all right, unclick, legal hold is off, all right, but there's another civil or another case which is similar, and you want to go back and you want to say, all right, where's all that stuff that was on legal hold? The part that concerned me here, Bob,
right,
was when you said, I'm taking it off of legal hold and whoosh,
whatever the retention policies are underlying it, right? So if I'm an attorney, right, so you want to think about this from an attorney perspective. Because I had long conversations about the expected behavior for this.
That's my point.
Right.
I'm trying to think like that.
So an attorney, first of all, if the case is already in place, right, let's say that the action, you wouldn't remove the legal hold for those users that are affected on this new case.
Active cases are fine, but what you find out in a lot of these legal lawsuits, all right, is that one item will come up. All right, there'll be a process, either a civil whatever it is. There'll be a disposition, and then all of a sudden, what will happen is, as a result of that prosecution, all right, something else will all of a sudden pop. Somebody else will say, "Oh, hold on a second, I'm sitting in that bucket too." All right, me too.
Right. So in that case, what the desired behavior would be is you only want to allow people to access records that are within your current retention policy. So if time passed between then and then, you wouldn't want them to have access. You wouldn't want them to have access to the data in which follows your retention policy. You wouldn't want to grant them extra access to it. That being said, right, they can. So when you do the discovery, so you put people on litigation hold. Right? Yeah. You do a discovery at point X time, and you dump it into a file, and you hand it off to the other attorney, right?
So the legal hold is for the individual, not for the items?
Right. The legal hold is well, they're placed on items, right? But they're done at the individual level, right? I can't, at a user level. I can't just say these specific items.
Okay. No. All right. I think that's probably the answer
then. So the idea behind it is, so we do the search. Let me just go back for a second. We do the search. We walk through, hey, specify a group of mailboxes, do all those kinds of things. By the way, if I'm doing a large search, right, I probably don't want to stand there and watch the little hourglass turn, right? I can just say, email me when it's done. So if it's 5,000 users over 7 years with a whole bunch of keywords, or complicated statements where it's weeding things in and out and all of that, I don't want to wait for that. right? So I'm just going to say email me when it's done. You get an email, hey, it's done. You click on the email, and boom, you get what looks like just a regular Outlook mailbox and Outlook Web Access with all the discovery there, right? So, and then all the data is there. You can then share that with other people, etc. Ultimately, what comes out of this is you dump it to a PST, right? So in a legal discovery or a FOIA request.
And it's all timestamped?
Yes, it's all of it's intact, right? There's a bunch of improvements around the workflow side of things from what we used to have in Exchange. So a couple of things we can do here, is to, hey, notify additional people when the thing is done. Hey, I only want one instance of a message. So if it's a message sent to all 5,000 people in the search, that was sent to all. I just need the original that says it was sent to these people, and it said this. I don't need 5,000 copies of it as I pull it from each and every mailbox, because that makes that PST, if I'm going to dump it to that, eventually get enormous. So I can do some of those kinds of selections. Send me when it's done. Another thing, by the way, that I think is pretty cool is it gives you, when you put in the search, it gives you sort of an estimated number, but based on the index of results you're going to get, right? Sometimes you might not realize that you just did a query and 48,000 items are going to come back. Sometimes, maybe you're like, oh, I forgot to add this, right? And so it just gives you, it's a great little thing to pop up to say, hey, is this bigger than a bread box? 1.5 million messages, right? Could be for a large organization, right? So what am I getting myself into before I run the search?
Is another question on that. When you're doing the e-discovery searches, there's 2 points. Does it allow either for an outside plugin, or does it have an internal mechanism that allows you to conduct a link analysis? In other words, if you're looking for people who have tripped, or EEO complaints,
right,
or things like that, does it allow for some sort of link analysis in the search, or does it allow for you to bring an outside plugin, all right, which would be another program?
So it does allow for an outside plugin. There's a couple of ways to go. Most of those kinds of analysis tools suck in the data from a PST, right, and manipulate it that way. However, it's Exchange Web Services based because it's just Exchange based. So if there was a party that literally wanted to go have these tools against the mailbox, it's just like connecting an Outlook client to the mailbox, right? You could completely do that, right? And so, and why we didn't spend that much time doing that stuff is because they're very industry and customer specific and attorney specific and law firm specific, and everyone would hate it, right? There'd be like one guy that likes it and everyone would hate it, and the reality is they all say we already buy these things to do these types of things in many cases, so we just let them use their own tools, right? We make it completely open. Hey, you can suck it in by a PST. All of those redaction tools for content management tools for legal discovery, etc., they all suck in PSTs as one of the things they do. So we just let those people use those content management tools. So yes, the answer, it's completely open. Whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, it's the same APIs are open to that.
Okay.
So I'm pretty much done here. The couple points to make is the end user experience is really good here, right? Which helps kind of drive this home. And particularly when we're looking at an on-premise / cloud delivery scenario. When both mailboxes are in the cloud, it's less important to be clearing out people's mailboxes. We give you a 25 gig mailbox in the cloud if you put your primary mailbox in the cloud, right? There's reasons to do all the holds and all of that stuff, but from a clearing space to save money, when you have a cloud mailbox, it's 25 gigs, right? And I'm sure it'll be 50 gigs or 100 gigs in 18 months from now, right? Because space is just there, right? But when the mail's on premise, right, you're paying for that storage. So wouldn't you like to send it to us? Where, by the way, we charge for this per user per month, unlimited storage, unlimited retention time, right? So if whatever you set your retention time to be, 10 years late. I mean, I have one customer that puts everyone on litigation hold forever, right? And just says, you can't get rid of anything ever, right? I'm not sure that's a great way to manage the data, but that's what they do, and we support that, right? The cool thing about administration standpoint, right, it's Exchange, right? So your admin interface in this looks just like Exchange, whether you do it on premise or in the cloud. And then, you know, the idea is that it lowers costs when you look at what it totally costs to run one of these solutions, right? So that's the, there's some links there. That's security, white paper, etc. Links are there. I'll put, if you give me a place to, or somewhere to send it, I'll give you the new Office 365 white paper, which will include this, the service description for this service as well that you put out there that people can look for more details.
No, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it. Either you or Mike, you send it to my email and I'll distribute it out to the
Do you have a
group.
question?
Yes.
Yes.
Many companies have softwares that attach their phone systems to the network.
Yes.
Like at my firm, so we have a separate software, and messages pop up as an email.
Right.
And I could take my BlackBerry and just listen to clients leaving me voicemails. But also internally, we have IM. So internal employees send that, and it's in a little box. If we had this program through Microsoft, are IMs and all internal communications within that time period for retention also stored, or do they go away?
It would be choice, right? So depending on what you use, so if you're using Microsoft products for IM,
Yes.
right, there's an integration here, right? So we can put those messages in your mailbox, right? So right now, if I pull up my laptop, I have something called Conversation History, and it's the archive of all my IM conversations I've ever had, right? And the cool thing about that is we view that as a different content type. So we could set a retention policy of 12 months on those and 10 years on email, which is more likely to be done. You may not want to keep 12 or 10 years of what are you doing for lunch, right? You know, kind of things. But there's also important stuff, right? So you can make those choices. From a voicemail perspective, it depends on the system and how it integrates, right? So, and what I'll say is, if the system just delivers WAV files as an attachment to a regular email message, it will be archived, but I can't separate that as a different content type. If you leverage Exchange Unified Messaging, right, and there are vendors that do, right, that are out there, and you may use that, that's a different content type within Exchange, and we can say things like, because this comes up a lot, I have a 7-day retention policy on voicemail and 10 years on email. How do I do that now that I have them together and I'm using one of these systems? Well, we actually can recognize those content types. There are some tricks around the WAV file stuff to get around to do, to say, hey, look, I can look for its source and sort of make a rule that deletes that at 7 days or 14 days or whatever if I want to. But all of those would be captured if you wanted them to be, right? And the question would then be, do you want them, and do you want them to have different policies? And we could work together to make sure that they map right. Yes?
Going back to data protection. Customer owns the information. Breach occurs at the data center. Customer has to notify based on state laws. What do the indemnification provisions look like with Microsoft? Who has responsibility ultimately for state fines and penalties or any regulatory penalties?
So the limits of liability in the contract with Microsoft is for the amount of money that the service is, you're building the service in a 12-month period, I think.
Okay.
Right, so, but we do accept, it's not like we say it's all you, but we do limit that liability. Now, I will say, there have been some states that have altered those terms. We won't go unlimited. We absolutely won't go that direction, but we have negotiated those terms in other agreements.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you're in New York, they're already altered in that contract.
And even if it's gross negligence on Microsoft's side at the data center where the breach occurred?
So here, I don't want to give an attorney answer for that, right? So
Good question, though.
that is right. So obviously, I don't want to do the analysis of whether there's an out for that in the limited liability terms. We can send those terms to you, right? And then have your attorney give their opinion of what those terms are. I will tell you this, that we have come to terms with city and state attorneys on these limited liability terms, right? So somewhere along the way, we've come to be okay with those in 48 or 50 states. So we've been able to, apparently they're reasonable. Yes?
It's kind of a general security question. A lot of the breaches you hear about in the news, it's all about companies, how they react to a breach. Like, for example, when Sony reacted to the
Very poorly, right?
Yeah. How does Microsoft manage to stay ahead of the curve and kind of not necessarily react to breaches, but maybe predict what the next breach is going to be, or what hackers are trying to do next? Just like-
So that's a great question. So one of the things I actually would suggest, there's a lot of really good content in our security white paper about how we manage security of our online services in general, right? And it's not just, hey, we have these kind of routers, right? It's like, here are the programs and policies and procedures. A lot of those are, some of those are ISO 27001 requirements,
Yeah.
right? Interesting, the cool thing about this scenario at Microsoft is it's managed by our Global Foundation Services, which is all of our public-facing data center properties are managed by the same security organization, right? So ultimately, within the product, right, there's an operation team that are Exchange guys, right? Where that's there. But when we talk about network security and all those things, these are the same folks that are managing Microsoft.com, MSN, Xbox Live, all of these, Hotmail, all of these services. An example, just within Microsoft as a company, right? Just the Microsoft company as the corporate entity, not Hotmail or any of that, right? Get like 70 million spam messages per day, right? So we have been on top of the curve for sort of, managing that kind of stuff makes big impacts to our networks, right? In general, we've been offering these services. Like example, Coca-Cola or Energizer, for instance, now it's 6 years on this service, right? So this is their 6th year coming up. When it was just literally the 5 customers that we had in those first couple of years, you called Microsoft's IT help desk if you had a problem and you worked at Energizer, right? That's how this whole thing started back then. So we actually have an entire team of guys that look at security trends from Microsoft. For example, right? Microsoft is maybe one of the most impactful IT companies when it comes to security and what would go on the internet if there were a breach, for instance, right? There's significant vulnerability, right? There's several hundred million PCs, right? So we have entire organizations that focus on forward-looking stuff that work with, for instance, the FBI and Homeland Security and all of those guys. Our internal IT security organization is pretty impressive. Example, we actually, if there was a car accident in front of one of our data center facilities in the business park that it was in, and literally they were monitoring it remotely by video to make sure it wasn't part of step 1 of some sort of, attack, right? And I actually saw the guy, they literally had somebody who was just sitting there staring at the monitor and called it, and they alerted it, highlighted, flagged it, were looking, started rolling the tape to save it, the whole 9 yards. We're pretty on top of that kind of stuff. There's a great talk that you guys might be interested in as one of the Global Foundation Services guys to talk about what they do around this. They probably wouldn't be able to get here in person, but they could certainly do like a webcast for this group, and they're happy to do those. And fascinating, the kind of all that goes into that. Yes?